For more than 47 years, our nonprofit, Resources for Seniors, has supported older adults and caregivers in Wake County. We can help in many different ways, including adult daycare programs, ramps and repairs, in-home supports, and consultation and referrals. Indeed, we're who to call when you're not sure who to call. Resources for Seniors stands ready to support you in your caregiving journey.
I'm Mark Costley, the founding attorney of Clarity Legal Group, the Triangle Area estate planning and elder law firm. You know those people who become overwhelmed dealing with the multiple challenges of being a caregiver? Clarity Legal Group helps people establish legal tools that avoid confusion, give them peace of mind, give them asset protection, and in some cases help them qualify for Medicaid. We help people get it right in the face of some of life's most important challenges. We don't just provide wills, trusts, and powers of attorney. We provide solutions and ongoing support. We provide clarity and peace of mind. It would be a privilege to help you.
Are you like 80% of seniors who would like to age in your current home? Call Wisdom Senior Care. Are you currently taking care of a loved one and finding yourself frustrated, tired, and even lonely? Call Wisdom Senior Care. Always available, dependable, and flexible. Come partner with Wisdom Senior Care, keeping wisdom at home.
Hi everybody, my name is Nicole Clagett, and as one of the conference organizers, I have the pleasure of facilitating today a family caregiving panel for you, where you're going to hear from 3 family caregivers who are being willing and vulnerable in sharing their journey with you as they walk along this caregiving journey. Because of social distancing, it may seem a little bit awkward with how we're going to be facilitating the panel today. We're maintaining 6 feet of distance, and so I'm going to be asking the family caregivers questions off camera and from a distance, but we hope you enjoy the presentation and travel along this journey with us. Our first guest is Maureen Gilchrist, and she has been a family caregiver for her mother who has passed. So Maureen, talk to us a little bit about your family caregiving journey with your mom. How did you find yourself to become a caregiver?
So my mama was one of 10 children, and she is the 7th of those 10 to have Alzheimer's. So unfortunately, my family's had a large family history with this disease, and my mother being the latest in the journey to get to the Alzheimer's. I had a lot of experience with folks in my family with Alzheimer's. As Mama aged and her Alzheimer's got worse, she needed to have somebody with her all the time, and we couldn't really leave her alone, so she moved in with me. And it was, to me, it was the best thing that ever happened in my life. But because I've had so much experience with Alzheimer's, because I walked the journey with my cousins, with my aunts and my uncles, I've also lost a cousin, Patrick, who was 55. So my family has really been devastated by this disease, which is why I'm so passionate about helping the Alzheimer's Association. Mama moved in with me 2 years before she passed. She passed 3.5 years ago, and when I moved here to North Carolina, she was supposed to come with me. She didn't make the journey, and this is why I found myself helping as much as I can with the association here, because I have more time on my hands I didn't expect to have. Mary moving in with me really was the joy of my life. I got to spend those last 2 years with her. As she is my best friend, she was my best friend, and I would never give them up, but I would never say they were easy, but they were wholeheartely worth it.
So given that your family has a big history with Alzheimer's disease, it sounds like, given you said I think 8 people in your family have had the diagnosis, how did you first respond when you learned of that diagnosis?
So unfortunately, because of the family history, I always was on guard, waiting for that moment, expecting it. My mother was the oldest to get diagnosed. All of her brothers and sisters were diagnosed in their 50s, so they were all early onset. My mother was not diagnosed till she was 75. So it was always sort of that waiting, like, is she going to? We didn't know, because you just don't know, just because the family history had been with early onset. And I started to see signs when she was probably around 70 and 71, the little signs that something was changing. It was actually right after she stopped working. So once I knew, I actually knew before the actual diagnosis came. Before the doctor told me, I knew because of my experience with the disease. And at first my heart broke, because this woman was the strongest woman I ever knew. She was active, she was busy, she would help anybody in a heartbeat, and she could go anywhere. She was independent, and all of those things started to change for her. And she wasn't able to be independent. She wasn't able to go at a drop of a hat to help a friend. because she couldn't find her way there, or she was nervous about going there, or I was nervous about her going there. I would take her to places, we would go out, and she would not know where she was, to places that she had been 100,000 times, in her life. And so the diagnosis broke my heart, because now, even though it happened to other family members, seeing it in my mother, the woman, my mother, I knew what was coming. And that part of the heartbreak is knowing where she's going to go with it and not knowing how the journey was going to be for her. That was the heartbreaking part for me in the beginning.
I know a lot of family caregivers who have a history of family members with Alzheimer's disease are absolutely scared to death about, am I going to be next? Given that there's no cure today, how are you kind of maintaining yourself in a day in and day out? I mean, I know myself personally the other day, this has been a long recording week getting ready for the Caregiver Summit, and I put the milk in the pantry, right? And so I would guess, sometimes when you have a familial history, when you do things like that, just because you're busy, you might go, oh no, is this the first sign? I mean, they say people are more afraid of Alzheimer's disease than even cancer.
Absolutely, absolutely. And being that my mother was one of 10, I have a large extended family, so there's 32 first cousins, and it's actually something we've spoken about often over the past 15, 20 years, is, if 70% of our aunts and uncles had Alzheimer's, what's the odds of the 32 of us? How many of us are going to get it? And we've already lost one, Patrick. He was 55. And so absolutely I have those moments where, I can't find my keys. And what do I do? And is this the first sign? Is this the start? And I'm single. I live alone. So there's an absolute fear there, because what if I am diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease? Who's going to take care of me? What is going to happen to me? It's absolutely frightening. And the rest of my family, we have conversations about, what can we do? And so today, because there is no cure and there is no treatment, what we do is we do the things that our doctors would tell us to do anyway. Stay healthy, exercise, eat right, get enough rest, keep our minds active. We're constantly within the family. We all do different types of games, whether it's crossword puzzles or reading or words with friends. I do a lot of things to make sure I keep my brain active, because I'm afraid. I'm afraid that I'm going to get this disease, and I don't know, I'm 51 now. So when I forget something today, it's, am I at the early onset? As the predominant instance in my family was. Or, I even can say to myself, well, if I'm blessed and I'm going to have to get this disease, I hope I get mama's kind. And I make it to 75. But it's a frightening prospect. All of us, we talk about it, and with the different testings that they can do to see whether you have the gene, we talk about that often. Do we want to know? And some cousins have thought about it and are thinking about taking the test. Me, and in speaking with my neurologist, mama's neurologist, until they can do something about it, I don't want to know.
I really appreciate that part of the conversation. I've often talked to people about that whole ethical and moral and just that dilemma, because if you get diagnosed with something that there isn't a cure for, that can really change your entire life's trajectory of, even making decisions. And I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing necessarily about having your own children or, retiring early or not, or, or if you have the gene, doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get it. So then you become even more suspect every time something happens.
It's interesting you make that point, Nicole, because I was speaking specifically to one of my cousins, Patricia, about the test. And she asked me if I would consider getting the test. And I said, well, I don't think so, because I think I would live differently. And I meant that in a way where I would be more guarded. I would tend to be more closed in. I would be afraid to go out into the world. And she said, but if I knew, I would live differently. And she meant it as a positive, that she would live every day to the fullest. She would take, every moment that she could, every experience that she could. It was an interesting juxtaposition of the same thought. So I try to think about that, but I'm still not willing to take the test until there's something that I can do about it, because instead what I do, I just live for today anyway.
Well, that's exactly right, because no one's promised a tomorrow. So what if we all actually lived every day to the fullest? Exactly. Wouldn't that be amazing? Every single one of us.
Wouldn't that be a gift?
It would be. It truly would be. Absolutely. So I also understand that you were working full-time while caregiving. Talk to us a little bit about how you juggled that. I can imagine that was very difficult.
Yes. So absolutely. When Mama moved in with me, it was a challenge, because now, again, being single and living alone, I had to change my life to have this other person in it. And my mother was with me a lot anyway, but now she was with me full time, and she was in the midst of her disease, and her disease was getting worse. So the first thing I had to do is I needed help. I couldn't do it alone. I could pretend that I was Superwoman and I can do this alone and me and Mary will be fine. All we need is each other. But that wasn't reality. I had a job to do because I had to work, because I had to pay for the house that we were living in. So the first thing I did is I found a really good adult day center. And interestingly enough, with my mom, she was always the boss. She was always in charge, and she loved helping and doing and projects and moving. And going to an adult day center, when I had proposed it to her about 5 years earlier, just to get her out of the house, she was like, nope, not happening, not my thing, I'm not interested in that. But now I had to have that help. So I found a wonderful facility. I was living in New Jersey at the time, and I found a wonderful facility, and they were amazing, and they worked with me. And so those days where Mary would say, nope, not going, what they would do is I could text them, and they would call me and say, Mary, listen, we need your help today. Could you come in? And now she's got a job. Now she has exactly what drove Mary her whole life, helping. And when she was there, the activities that they were doing, she thought they were silly. She thought it was ridiculous that people in a wheelchair were lifting weights. In her mind, that didn't make sense. So what they did is they had her help. She was responsible for setting the table for lunch. She helped them put up the blackboards. They understood her, and they took the time to do that. And they did it with other folks that went to the day center. She was one of the more high functioning still, and I loved how they just worked with it. And because it was so important to me. She went for about 5 hours every day. They picked her up in the morning and they dropped her off in the afternoon, and that gave me that solid 5 hours to work. On top of that, I was very blessed that I had a job that was flexible, that allowed me this. Now, the other thing that was a challenge is that I travel for my job. And so in that aspect, what do? Again, I needed help. I needed to figure out where the help was going to come from to allow me to do what I had to do. I could have changed jobs, but I didn't want to. And so I was able to find a friend who was a caregiver, and she would help me out. And so she would be the one that would give me nighttime respite. If I needed to just go to the gym one night, she would come over and spend an hour or two with Mama. And when I needed to travel, she stayed with my mom. And so my mother would still go to the day center because she needed that consistency. When they needed something different, Teresa would take her to her house. And then my mother would just be with her family and her kids and her dog. And it was an amazing setup. But I had to admit that I needed help. I am my mother's daughter, and I could very easily have said, nope, I got this. We'll figure it out, and we could have become hermits and stayed home together. But that wouldn't have been good for me, and it wouldn't have been good for her. Mary needed the socialization of other people. If she was just with me, it would not have been good for her. She was a very social person. So enlisting the help of people that I trusted, that I grew to trust, was so integral to my being able to do this and keep my own sanity.
I really appreciate the fact that you brought up accepting help and the recognition that it wasn't going to be healthy for you to do this without help. And I've been a family caregiver twice myself, and I will tell you both times I made the gigantic mistake of putting on my superhero cape and rushing and running and just feeling like I've got this, I can handle this. And in the beginning, when you become a family caregiver and a loved one gets diagnosed with any type of chronic condition, people typically come running, and the meal train starts happening and everybody wants to jump in and help. And when you're being that superhero caregiver, you're saying, I've got this, I'm fine. You keep telling people no, and then eventually they stop asking to help you, right? Mm-hmm. And then that's when you actually need the help, and it's not the people in your circle's fault. It's really your fault for not building that time in. So one of the things I often tell family caregivers is, even when you don't feel like you need the help, take it and really create that regimen in your life. Absolutely. So that when you actually need it someday, Absolutely. It'll be your lifeline.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Building that network of my friends that I knew and trusted and that I took the time. One of the things that I had to do for me to be comfortable leaving my mother, again, my mother's daughter, I'm a good control freak, and we were fine together. My mother was amazing, and we were so close that I had no challenges with her. I was very blessed. But I had to be comfortable leaving her with other people and that she would be okay. And so I took the time to train them. Whereas they would come over and spend time with us when we were together so they could see how I interacted with her, to see how I spoke with her, see how I redirected her when necessary, and just to get to know Mary, if they didn't already know her. And then towards the end, when Mom was sick, the last 6 weeks of Mom's life were awful. And I needed help, but I was at this point more cloistered because we were so focused on taking care of Mom that my friends that knew how to help me with Mary, they just showed up. They showed up at the door and said, go, we've got her. Go take a shower, go to the gym, get out of the house, take a nap, do what you have to do. We're good. And I knew they were because they'd already done that in the past. So it really helped.
So hundreds of people are watching this right now, and one caregiver and one care partner just represents one situation. So we all know that every situation is different. But if you're talking to family caregivers who are caregiving for a loved one with a cognitive impairment such as Alzheimer's disease, do you have one tip for them to help make their jobs easier?
So it's funny, I love this question because so many things are going through my mind that I could say, well, you need to think about this and think about this, because these are all the things that you learn. You know, they always say the only person that can understand your journey is somebody who's walked the path. And so having walked that path, the one tip that comes to mind, and it might seem silly, but I'll tell you, this will change your life. If you are caregiving for somebody and showers are a struggle because the water becomes a challenge, they can't see it. And so getting them in there, and then they're getting hit with this water, and there can be different reactions to it. Getting your loved one clean is important because physical health starts with a clean body, and then, you know, it also, who doesn't love a good shower? Even if they don't remember that, they love a good shower. And so I have these loofah gloves. You can buy them at Bed Bath & Beyond, you can buy them at CVS, and they're gloves you put on, and you put the soap on it, and then you wash your body. And what I did with my mom is I put a pair on her, and I put a pair on me, and I mimicked what I needed her to do in the shower. And this way, she got clean top to bottom. She shampooed her hair, she washed her body, every nook and cranny got washed. Because she had the gloves on, all she was doing was mimicking me. And she did that a lot. You know, there's a term for it, I can't remember the term for it, aping. And this way, when she was in the shower, I knew that every part of her body was clean. She was also getting a nice massage with the loofah gloves. And then we took them off, cleaned them up, hung them up. The next shower, out they came. Bright colors. Again, it's the visual thing. It made such a difference in getting mom into the shower on a regular basis because she loved to shower. And it's so important to just the health of the body, and I think the mind as well.
If I may, I have one last question for you. You know, you sound like incredibly energetic and upbeat, and sounds like you maintain a really positive attitude because of your relationship with your mom and just generally the spirit of who you are. I can just see that. Talk to us a little bit about how you made it through some of those tougher days. Where did you find your resilience and all that?
That's a great question because like I said, this was the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life, but I would never ever say that it was easy because it's a challenge. You're now taking care of somebody in a different capacity. You know, this is my mother, and I had to take care of her, and she was childlike. The difficult moments came in the silence for me. As long as I was with mom, we had a purpose, we had a focus, you know, we were always holding hands, everything was okay. When she went to bed at night and I sat on the couch and I took that exhale, that's when it hit me that I was losing my best friend, you know, and with Alzheimer's, they say you lose them twice. You lose them in mind first, then you lose them in body. And where I turned for support was my closest friends. My cousin Colleen is one of my closest friends, and her father had Alzheimer's. And she's been down this journey with us, with all of our aunts and uncles and my cousin. She worked in a facility, a living facility, assisted living facility. And so she was around folks like, you know, with this disease, and she was my confidant. But I also, a lot, and I don't know that I've actually said this to a lot of people other than here, is I use the 800 number, the Alzheimer's 800 number, because I needed somebody that I could talk to that wasn't going to have an agenda, that wasn't going to...
The helpline.
Tell me, the Alzheimer's 800 helpline, yes, sorry about that. Because I needed somebody with resources. I didn't need the resources, but sometimes I needed the resources of what do you do in this situation? How do you handle this? Or how do I handle this? You know, I felt like I had the life stuff, but the emotional impact of it, you know, I had a harder time exposing to people because I had to have it, I got it under control, I can do this. Me and Mary were fine, as long as we're together, we're good. But inside, I was losing my mom, and I was losing her in the most devastating way, I think. I agree with what Nicole mentioned before, that I am more afraid of getting Alzheimer's than I am of getting cancer. And in my family, we have Alzheimer's and we have cancer. And morbid joke my cousins say is, I hope I get Alzheimer's first, then I won't know I have cancer. But it's not the truth, because I am actually more afraid of that. And so I needed somebody that could be objective and that I could talk to and that understood what was available. You know, I didn't find my adult day center on my own. I did it with the help of the 800 helpline. They were the ones that talked to me about how do you find a facility? How do you vet them? How do you make sure that you're comfortable and that they will meet your loved one's needs? Because there's a lot of places we can go. There were things that I needed. I needed transportation. I needed a meal. I needed this number of hours a day. And they were the ones that helped me with how do I ask the right questions. So reaching out, having a confidant. Like for me, it was my cousin Colleen, and then really use that helpline. There's amazing resources out there, and you can call them with anything. And I called them. I remember one night I was sitting in my living room, and I was watching the documentary about Glenn Campbell, and I was just bawling because I was bawling for Glenn Campbell because he was one of my mother's favorites. As I've grown up, I listened to all old country music, but I was bawling for my own situation. It just brings out the emotion. And for some reason, I picked up the phone, and I called the 800 number, and the person on the other line just talked to me. And just talk to me through that moment. And that was so valuable because I don't know that at 10:30 at night I would have called somebody else and just said, this is a terrible situation, this stinks, and probably some other words that I can't say on camera. But I could do that to this line. That's what the line is there for. So use it because it is valuable.
Thank you so much for your time and sharing these precious moments with us, and hopefully the caregivers watching today really glean some advice and some support from what you've done in your life. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole.
Next, we're going to talk to Charles Clifton, who is going to be talking to us about what it's like to caregive for his mom. Charles, thank you so much for talking to us today. Talk to us a little bit about how your mom was diagnosed with dementia.
Well, first of all, my mom moved in with me from Winston-Salem, and that was back in the summer of 2012 due to some other health challenges. And while she lived with me, just noticing changes, and then she talked about changes in losing her memory. So in the transition from our medical providers from Winston-Salem to Durham, that's when the dementia diagnosis came up. At first, it was her diagnosis was a mix of between vascular dementia and normal pressure hydrocephalus. Then, back in 2016, she got a second opinion, and that's when she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's.
So your journey really sounds not too different from a lot of other family caregivers. When you start noticing some cognitive impairments, they sort of open a lot of different doors until they finally open the door of the proper diagnosis of the cognitive impairment. That must have been a difficult journey for all of you as family members.
Yes, and then plus as like Maureen, my family's been dealing with dementia for a long time. Both her sisters have passed from it. Her oldest sister passed in 2010, and her youngest sister, she was diagnosed at roughly the same time as my mom. So, and she passed in 2016. So it's just been, I've had the experience of doing it from afar, but when it hits close to home, that's when you say that's the challenge begin, because in my mind, I was thinking when she was diagnosed with the vascular dementia, it wasn't going to be as bad as my aunt who had full-blown Alzheimer's, her oldest sister. But I was mistaken on that time because no matter what the type of dementia is, it will hit, you will feel it, and you'll have the same symptoms and heartbreak. And seeing my mom go through this and being up close and personal with it, it's a challenge.
So what have some of the biggest challenges been for you?
Well, and also she was losing her mobility as well during that time. At first she was walking fine, but then in the summer 2013, she used the bedside commode and just could not stand. So had to rush her to the emergency room, and she stayed in the hospital for 4 days and then had to go to rehab to recover, just to get her mobility back up such that she can come back and live with me. And then when her mobility worsened and then her cognition got worse, back in 2016, then that came the decision for me to have to move her into memory care, which she's been there at the same facility since 2016. It's right at 4 years.
So you are one of those caregivers today that are dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and caregiving and having a loved one in a residential community with visitation limited. Talk to us a little bit about what that's been like for you.
Well, at first when COVID just hit, I could go and visit, but had to do the screenings, had to tell them that I haven't traveled or been out of the country. They had to take my temperature. And I visited my mom for the first week, and then right at March 21st, then that's when the facility said there's
The
no
whole
more
world shut
family-
down.
No more family visitation. So that was hard because I've been used to going to visit her almost 3 times a week for the past 3.5 years. And now to be regulated to just Zoom calls, which I tried a couple of times with my mom. The first time it was great. It just, both of us had a smile and it was just happy to see each other. And then the second time she just noticed the change where she just cried for the entire call. So that just broke my heart. Fortunately, where she stayed, she just had no cases of COVID, so they opened up outdoor visitation. So I went to visit her 3 times since they reopened visitation. And for me, the first time, it was a bit of an adjustment because you basically have to reintroduce yourself to them because it's been 4 months since I've seen her, and I've been going and checking on her at least 3 times a week for the past 3.5 years. And now it's that 4-month time frame where it shut down. That was the longest period that I have gone through without having any face-to-face contact with my mom. And that's throughout my life. And for the first visit, she really didn't recognize me. And of course, you have to have the mask on, so just had to really lower my mask just so she can see my entire face before she really recognized me. And then the last 2 visits, they were a little bit better. You take the small victories where she'll say the second visit, she'd say my name, and then the last visit, which was last week, where she just, hey, Charles. And so I just savored those small moments where she was able to recognize me.
That's heartbreaking and incredibly difficult for you to go through. I'm so sorry that we're all facing this together, obviously, but that's really hard. So I'm sorry about all of that for you and your mom. Have there been any lessons that caregiving has taught you over the years? Any big surprises?
I think the main lesson that caregiving has taught me the value of patience. Because one of the main symptoms of Alzheimer's and dementia is where your parent will just repeat the same question over and over again. And for me to maintain that sense of calm and answering the same question at time number 20, as I did at the first instance, even though inside I was, but just not showing it to her, that's a gift. And it also taught me that about the inner strength that's inside of me, just to keep going and keep persevering, and to know that although she's in a facility, and I still notice the decline, that still there, and I have to keep going for her.
Do you have a wish that you have related to the way you could be better supported in caregiving for your mom by anyone or any organization?
Well, for me, not necessarily. And throughout my caregiving journey, I have gone into support groups, one from the Duke family support group in the evenings, just because that's the only time that I have, is because I work full-time as well. And I've also gone to the support group from the Alzheimer's associations. I go to the caregiver summits and any conferences that I have become aware about in the state of North Carolina, just to get all of the education that I have. And then me being an only child, it's also rough and single, but I do have support from my aunts, who has called me twice a week ever since my mom was diagnosed, and from other family members who at least check in on me from time to time.
So lastly, do you have any tips to help support family caregivers who may be in a different place in their journey right now?
Yeah, I would say just to meet them where they are. And I'll just share a similar experience as Maureen about bathing. Although I didn't use the gloves, but I just really found what worked with me and my mom, where I would just, when she wasn't able to wash herself, I would just sit her on the toilet and just give her a good sponge bath. And the other tip I would have is not to try to force the issue. If you notice that they don't want to take that extra bite to eat, don't force it.
Pick your battles.
Yes. Yes, and if they don't want to take that extra sip of water, don't try to force it, because, okay, it's the disease. They might not want it at that time, so you just really have to be in tune with your care recipient to meet them where they are.
Well, Charles, we thank you for sharing your journey with your mom, and I hope that the veil of COVID-19 lifts and that you'll be able to have a more normal time with her in the near future.
Thank you, Nicole.
Next, we're talking to Kathy Rausch, who is going to be talking to us about her care partner who has young onset Alzheimer's in their 50s. Kathy, thank you so much for joining us. Talk to us a little bit about how your care partner found themselves diagnosed with young onset Alzheimer's.
Well, Rob, my partner, was pretty much at the prime of his career when he was 52. And we started noticing that, or I really started noticing that he was losing his phone, losing his cord to his laptop, not knowing where his laptop was. But his mother had also just passed. And so I thought that's what it was. And then fast forward a few months later to 2017, I noticed he started getting calls from work that he didn't know where things were. And one day I said to him, "How are you forgetting things at home and not forgetting things at work?" When he said, "Well, I'm not sure I am because I'm not sure I have a job." And that was very, very devastating. So we immediately went to a primary care physician, who then said, well, Rob had already been in here, but he knew who the president was and this and that. But when I went through my list of what was going on, he immediately sent us to a neurologist, and within 2 hours in the neurology office, they gave us the devastating news that he had Alzheimer's.
How did that impact your life?
It was devastating. I've been in healthcare my whole life. So most recently at that point, I was working for a company and I was in long-term care facilities all the time. So I was very familiar with what was going to happen and what we were going to go through. And when you get this diagnosis for someone that's only 53 years old, you know, it was so psychologically hard for me. It didn't really faze him. He just was in denial, and probably 3.5 years later still somewhat is in denial. But psychologically, it was very, very hard to accept the diagnosis for someone so young and so vibrant.
Well, it really changes the trajectory of how you picture your future together, too. I mean, just everything from what the retirement years might look like and, you know, things having to do with, you know, other young children in your lives or what have you. I mean, it really just kind of changes things. How have you worked through that in this time?
Well, that was tough because you're right. We both enjoyed really good careers. We traveled internationally all the time. And, you know, we had plans in the future to get a mountain house, to go here, to go there, and all of that completely went away. So it was tough. And I just had to take a few months to get myself together on that because I'm an organized person and, you know, I always like to know my plans and what's happening. So I tried to just turn things around where we planned differently. We were going to plan different trips and forget about a mountain house and start thinking about what we were going to do, you know, in the future. And at the beginning, he was staying at home and could still drive. All that's changed now. So, you know, he was still getting to live his life a little bit the way he wanted to. But, you know, we've just had to accommodate different things, you know, and not get to travel like we used to.
I think one of the things that is really often minimized is really the impact of caring for someone on the actual caregiver's health. Have you experienced anything related to your own health, even the stress of caregiving? I know when I was a family caregiver a couple of times, at the end of my journey with my grandfather, I was caring for a 2-week-old, a 2-year-old, a puppy, and my husband. And I'm not sure which one of those required more of my time and attention. But after my grandfather passed, after a brief illness in the hospital, I looked in the mirror one day and I didn't even recognize who I saw. I mean, and I know I had gone from, you know, post-baby to like back to slim, but I mean, I just looked absolutely exhausted and horrible. And you know, as I wasn't really taking the time to feel myself. Has caregiving impacted your health at all?
I think so, and I think it's kind of a two-part thing. The first part is the psychological part, and psychologically you're devastated, you're trying to work through that, which I think affects your health because you end up you know, not taking care of yourself. I wasn't exercising like I used to. The guilt feelings that you have of leaving somebody and going to do something else. I used to be an avid tennis player and would play 3-4 times a week and just had to cut that down. And now I have arthritis in my knees, so I can't play anymore at all. So I had to give that up. But one feeds on the other. So you're busy, you're tired. I too work full time. We have 2 dogs. You're maintaining your house. We have 0 family members. So I am the person. There is no one to help us but me. So, you know, I found I wasn't eating right. And then with the pandemic that hit this year, you couldn't go out to eat anymore. So then you're having to cook at home more. And sometimes I would feed him and go, you know, I'm just going to eat a piece of bread. But I think the psychological factor, you have to lift yourself up. Like you said, you looked in the mirror. You have to do that for yourself every now and then and say, look, you're tired. You know, you need to do things for yourself. So for me, getting Robin to adult daycare helped take the stress off during the day of saying, what is he doing? You know, trying to track where he's going. And then now I have a caregiver come in on Saturday mornings to let me go do something sports related so that I can stay active. But, exercising is really important, and keeping your mind free is really important because it's hard. Everything weighs on your mind all the time, and I have to try to stop myself from trying to plan in the future too much, because I'll go, okay, now 2 years from now, where should we be? And I have to roll myself back and say, live in the moment, because you can't plan for the future that much.
So based off of this conversation, it sounds like you've enlisted some outside support. I know one of the challenges, especially when you're with a person who has a cognitive impairment, or even not, for those watching who have loved ones who have a chronic illness that does not have that cognitive piece, really getting them to accept that help and support can be difficult. Any tips or advice on how to help a family caregiver have that conversation with a loved one?
Yeah, that's good. And getting Rob to go to adult daycare, I knew was going to be difficult. So being a young man, we used sort of like what Maureen's experience, we used the volunteer aspect of it. He's been going there about 1.5 years, and he still thinks he volunteers there. And that's good because he was so used to going to a job and having responsibilities. And so when he goes every day, he really feels like he's useful and he's doing something. The harder part was getting someone to come in the home. I had to have an excuse for why someone was coming in the home, because it's hard to tell a 56-year-old man you can't stay by yourself anymore. It takes away some of his dignity, and I try hard to keep that. So I was putting together an emergency plan. What if something happened to me? I'm the only one that takes care of him. So when I was doing that, I enlisted the help of a home health agency that would be able to take over should I have to go to the hospital or do something. And I used that as my excuse to say, we're going to practice on our emergency plan and have someone come in on Saturday morning. And then the next Saturday I said the same thing, and now he doesn't even ask me while they're there. And I think he kind of enjoys not being alone, actually. So, and it frees me up to be able to go and I play pickleball now instead of tennis. Go do that and have camaraderie of being with other people, and know that he's safe at the same time.
So do you have any tips or tricks that you can give caregivers on how to assist with the providing of care?
Well, I think someone with young onset Alzheimer's is different than an older person with it, because they still try to maintain who they are, I think, a whole lot more than maybe an older person would. And for us, it was hard to organize during the day back when I was going to work and taking him to daycare. So I came up with several iterations of things, but I have a list of things that we need to do in the morning, and I laminated it so we could write and he could go check off and know he did a specific task. And it made him feel really good that he did that task. And he'd go back to the list and hold it up and say, I've done this, we can, what's next? So that was something important for us, and maybe just because I'm an organized person, that we knew that we were going through our list every day. And I still do that on Saturdays in a different way now. I just have a little whiteboard, and I just make suggestions for things for them to do during the day, while I'm gone. So it's a simple little thing, but it really, I think, helps him with his dignity, knowing he's doing the task and I'm not having to go and say, go over here, pour your coffee, go eat your cereal. He can look at the list and do it.
So caregiving for a partner or a spouse is very different in many ways relationally than caregiving for a parent or another relative. How do you maintain your relationship through caregiving, and you don't suddenly become just the caregiver, but you actually still have some of that spark and love that a spousal or partner type relationship would have?
Yeah, it's a good question, and definitely things change. There's just no two ways about it. In our relationship now, it's more like he's my son than my partner. But we've always been very, very good friends, and so it works. It's the closeness is still there. It's not the same as it was years ago, But, you know, I try to keep him involved in everything that I do so that he feels involved. And he can't cook, or he can't really do anything. His executive functioning is so bad now. But I always say we. So if I cook a meal, I'll say, wow, we made a great meal, didn't we? And he's like, yeah, that's really good. Or if I work in the yard, I had to trim all our shrubs the other day, and he helped me pick up some of the stuff on the ground, and I told somebody else when they were there, we cut the shrubs today. And that was really important to him. He felt like, yeah, we worked, we were really sweaty and hot, it was great. And, you know, we sit together on the couch every night, and, you know, we still sleep together. Things are just a little different because, you know, like I said, it's sort of like he's my son, but it's still sweet and nice.
So what about any pet peeves? You know, you've been a caregiver now for several years. Are there any sort of pet peeves about the way people treat you or treat him that you just wish, my gosh, we just want to erase that?
Yeah, I think the saddest thing is we've lost a lot of our friends. It's almost like people think you can catch Alzheimer's.
They don't know what to do, right?
Yeah, they don't. And, you know, I always say the best thing you can do for him is just talk to him. Just be his friend. Take him. He used to be an avid cycler. I mean, he's ridden behind the Tour de France, Giro d'Italia, all these things. And, you know, everyone backed off. No one takes him riding. And so I really wish, a pet peeve of mine is that people would be their friend. Just be their friend. He's so young, and he just needs to get out with friends, because like we've all said in this panel today, they're all social. Everyone's social. They crave talking to someone, and it's the one thing they can really do well now is talk to somebody else. You know, it might just be about the dog, and it might be about the squirrels in the backyard, but they love that and need it.
It's a sense of belonging.
Exactly. Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Well, I appreciate it.
Wow, those were some amazingly vulnerable stories that the caregivers shared with us today. And I really hope that you found something that lifted up your spirits or made you feel like somebody else just understands. You know, speaking from experience, I know how difficult family caregiving can be, and we are just so happy that you're here with us today, walking this journey with us. And I know we're not all together where we can put our arms around each other like we normally do, to share a lunch, to have a keynote presentation, and just be there knowing that we're in the trenches. But do know that all of our hearts and spirits are with you during this journey, and that you are not alone. You know, when I was caregiving for my grandfather, some of these stories just reminded me of some of those moments I mentioned. You know, I had a 2-week-old, a 2-year-old, a puppy, a husband. My house was just so busy. And my grandfather had very, very poor circulation, and I had to every single night soak his feet in a hot water bath and massage his legs and take his Ted hose off, and it was quite a challenge, and it was quite physically exhausting too. So every night at 11 o'clock at night, he and I would have chat time, and I would do that with him before I finally could lay down at midnight, before I had to get up at 2 a.m. to nurse the baby again. And one night I was doing all this for him, and I was looking down at his feet, and he tapped me on the shoulder, and I looked up at him, and he said, "Nicole, this is just too much for you." And I looked up at him, and I said, "You know what, Grandpa? It really is." And, you know, I carried guilt about saying that to him that day for a very long time, but it really is a very, very difficult journey to be that family caregiver. He and I both wept for a moment, and we hugged, and it was just that realness of that moment and that understanding. And he knew I was there to care for him still and be a compassionate granddaughter to him and do all that I could before he passed away. But just know that there are so many people here today that want to support you in this journey. We know it's really hard to caregive during COVID-19, and we are here walking alongside you. There are so many resources for you, so many other sessions that hopefully will support you and really lift your spirits. So we thank you so much for being here, and we hope that these caregivers who shared a piece of their hearts with you today will help you feel loved and appreciated. Thank you.